Chapter 2, Host Defenses Against Pathogens, the Adaptive Immune Systems. The learning objectives of this chapter are describe the roles and functions of immunological cells involved in adaptive immune systems. At the end of this topic, you'll be able to also elaborate and explain cell-mediated and also antibody-mediated immune response. Finally, list and explain the functions of antibodies. You may find the major references in the spectrum. There are bacterial pathogenesis, chapter 4, the second line of defense, and also in the online textbooks of bacteriology, the TODA online textbooks of bacteriology. Both of these have already been uploaded in Spectrum. Let's look at the definition. What is adaptive immune systems or immune response? Unlike innate immune response, where the activity or the response are general, adaptive immune response are antigen specific. They only react upon very specific antigens and produce a certain types of antibody particularly. They are more complex compared to innate immune response, involve many different types of immune cells, and adaptive immunity also includes a memory that makes future responses against a specific antigen more efficient. In other words, it actually remembers the attack, they remember the antigen, and they are able to produce a response in a faster manner the next time they encounter this antigen. There are three important factors or elements of adaptive immune response. There are specificity, memory, and tolerance. Specificity, as I've already explained earlier, that the reaction, the response are specific to a certain type of antigen. The immune cells, the response of immune cells, adaptive immune cells towards antigens are very specific, and they can remember, they have memory. A lot of time, like for example the T cells and B cells, they do produce memory cells where they can remember the attack, and the next time when the same antigen attack again the body, the response will be way faster compared to the first time. And their tolerance means that the adaptive immunological cells, they can recognize self and foreign antigens, in which this provide a mechanism when our immune response systems do not attack on our own cells. Specificity. An antibody or reactive T cells, they will react specifically with the antigen that induces formation. However, a lot of time there cross-reactivity can also occur. The specificity of the immunological response can be explained on the basis of clonal selection hypothesis, in which during the primary immune response, a specific antigen selects a pre-existing clone of specific lymphocytes and stimulates exclusively its activation, proliferation, and also differentiation. Memory. Once the immunological response has reacted to produce a very specific type of antibody or reactive T cell, it is capable of producing more of the antibody or activated T cells rapidly in a larger amount. We refer this as secondary or memory response. And finally, tolerance. The cells it is tolerant to self-antigens. This tolerance is brought about in a number of ways, but basically the immunological system, they are able to distinguish self-antigens from non-self antigens, and it will respond to non-self but not to self. There are two types of adaptive immune systems, which is antibody-mediated immunity and also cell-mediated immunity. We can look at this overview of immune response. The antigen over here, when we refer to antigen, it actually are the foreign objects, including bacteria, including viruses, parasites, fungi, and also toxins that are foreign, they are not recognized by our body. So this antigen presentation will trigger very specific defense or an immune response, that is adaptive immune response. And there are two types: cell-mediated immunity, as has been shown over here, where the phagocytes will be activated and later on T cells will be activated, and these will lead to a direct physical and chemical attack, where the activated T cells will find the pathogens and attack them through phagocytosis or the releases of chemical toxins that lead to self-destruction of the antigens. Whereas in the second mechanism, which is the antibody-mediated immunity, B cells are involved over here. So activated B cells will give rise to cells that produce a lot of antibodies. And these antibodies will act in 6 different mechanisms that lead to destruction of antigens. Cell-mediated immunity and antibody-mediated immunity, they communicate between each other and feedback. So these two mechanisms, adaptive immune response mechanism, they actually work together at the same time, and there is a regulation, there is a communication and feedback between these two that we will look at it later on. There are 3 classes of lymphocytes being circulating in the bloodstream: the T cells, B cells, and also natural killer cells, or just NK cells. T cells are involved in the cell-mediated immune response, whereas B cells are involved in the antibody-mediated response. T cells account for approximately 80% of circulating lymphocytes. So there are 3 major types of T cells: the cytotoxic T cells, helper T cells, and suppressor T cells. Cytotoxic T cells attack foreign cells or body cells that are infected by viruses, commonly by direct contact. So these are the primary cells involved in the production of cell-mediated immunity, or just cellular immunity. Whereas helper T cells, they stimulate the activation and function of both T cells and B cells. That's why it's termed helper T cells. And the third type of T cells are suppressor T cells. Suppressor T cells inhibit the activation and function of both T cells and B cells. It involves in the regulatory of the immune systems. The interplay between suppressor T cells and helper T cells helps establish and control the sensitivity of the immune response. Both helper T cells and suppressor T cells are very important in regulating the level, the degree of the immune responses. And B cells account for about 10 to 15% of circulating lymphocytes. These B cells can develop, upon activation, it can develop into plasma cells. So when being stimulated, they can differentiate into plasma cells which produce and secrete antibodies. They are said to be responsible for antibody-mediated immunity or humoral immunity, because antibodies circulate widely in the body fluids. And the last one, natural killer cells, they account for about 5 to 10% of circulating lymphocytes. They perform immune surveillance, attacking foreign cells, body cells infected with viruses, and cancer cells that appear in normal tissues. Natural killer cells many times are said to be also involved, a part of, natural killer cells are actually part of the innate immune systems. Let's look at antibody-mediated immunity or immune response. Antibody-mediated immunity is also called humoral immune response. It is a type of adaptive immunity that is mediated by soluble host proteins that are called antibodies or immunoglobulins. If a naive or unstimulated B cells encounters an antigen, it is stimulated to develop into a plasma cell, which produces the antibodies that will react with the stimulating antigen. The stimulated B cells also develop into clones of identical reactive B cells, which are called memory B cells. The humoral response is carried out by antibodies, which are produced by plasma cells, and plasma cells are derived from activated B cells that are produced in the bone marrow. So the major function of B cells or lymphocytes is to actually develop into antibody secretory plasma cells.